Jade is 41 years old. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia. She earns $87,000 a year as a project manager for a mid-sized logistics company, a salary she worked a long time to reach. And for the last 14 years, without missing a single month, she has transferred $600 into her investment account on the first of every month. She didn't do it because it was easy. She did it when the car needed new tires, and she did it anyway. She did it the month her hours got cut, and she did it anyway. She did it through a breakup and a move and 2 years of a pandemic, and she did it anyway. 14 years, 720 contributions, not one missed. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, Jade is sitting at her kitchen table, laptop open, tea going cold beside her, looking at the total. $196,400. She does the math in her head, the way she always does. At this rate, $600 a month, consistent returns, she figures she'll have somewhere around $480,000 by the time she's 55. Maybe enough, maybe not. She's not entirely sure. She closes the laptop. She goes to bed. And here is the thing Owen knows that Jade doesn't. Jade didn't need to keep contributing for another 14 years to reach financial stability. The math on her portfolio had already begun to shift. She just didn't know what to look for. And neither do most people. If you've ever done everything right, saved consistently, invested patiently, avoided the big mistakes, and still felt like financial freedom was always just a little further away than it should be, that feeling is not a sign that you're behind. It's a sign that nobody ever showed you the right numbers. Most financial content talks about compounding like it's a magic trick that happens at the end, something you experience in retirement when the work is done. What almost nobody explains is that there is a specific structural moment. It happens before retirement, often years before, where the math of your portfolio quietly and permanently changes. Not because you did something different, not because the market did something unusual, but because your investments crossed a threshold where their growth began to outpace what your life actually costs. And once that gap opens, it doesn't close. In this video, we're going to walk through exactly what that threshold is, why it happens earlier than almost anyone expects, why most people completely miss it when it does, and the 2 specific numbers that will tell you exactly where you are relative to it right now. This is not retirement math. This is not a savings tip. This is the explanation of something that may already be happening inside your portfolio and that you deserve to actually understand. Mechanism 1. The compounding handoff. Let's start with something most people think they understand, but actually don't. Compounding. Not the basic idea. You know the basic idea. Bigger balance, faster growth. You learned that part. What most people miss is that compounding has 2 completely different phases, and they feel nothing alike. Phase 1 is contribution-driven growth. This is the phase Jade is in. This is the phase most people spend the majority of their investing lives in. In this phase, the primary engine of your portfolio's growth is what you put in. Your monthly contributions are doing the heavy lifting. The returns help, but they're not yet the dominant force. If you stopped contributing in phase 1, the portfolio would still grow, but slowly, quietly, in the background. Phase 2 is return-driven growth. This is where something structural changes. At a certain portfolio size, the annual return produced by the portfolio itself begins to out-exceed what your contributions add each year. Let's put a real number on that for Jade. Jade is contributing $600 a month. That's $7,200 per year. Her portfolio is now $196,400. At an 8% average annual return, the long-term historical average for a diversified index portfolio, her portfolio is generating approximately $15,712 in returns this year. Her money is already making more than twice what she puts in.
She doesn't feel it. Nothing in her daily life has changed. Her paycheck looks the same. Her account balance moves in ways that feel like noise, not signal. But underneath the noise, the engine has already shifted. This is the compounding handoff. The moment when your portfolio stops being primarily powered by your effort and starts being primarily powered by its own momentum. For most people at a consistent 8% return, this handoff happens somewhere between $90,000 and $120,000 in invested assets, depending on contribution rate. Jade crossed it more than 2 years ago. She just didn't know to look for it.
Mechanism 2, the lifestyle anchoring effect.
Now, here's the psychological layer that makes the math even more powerful than most people realize. There's a well-documented phenomenon in behavioral economics called hedonic adaptation. The basic idea is this: humans adapt to their circumstances. When something improves, we adjust our baseline, and the improvement stops feeling special. When something stays the same, we stop noticing it. Most people assume that as they earn more and accumulate more, their lifestyle will naturally expand to match. And for some people it does. That's lifestyle inflation, and it's a real and documented problem. But here's what the data also shows. A significant portion of consistent savers, people like Jade, people who built the habit of spending less than they earn, develop a lifestyle baseline that becomes remarkably stable. Not because they're restricting themselves, because that baseline became normal. Jade spends approximately $4,200 a month. She has spent approximately $4,200 a month, adjusted for ordinary inflation, for the last 7 years. She doesn't feel deprived. This is just her life. This is what normal feels like to her. $4,200 a month is $50,400 a year. And that number, her lifestyle cost, is the second half of the equation that nobody ever told her to pay attention to. Mechanism 3. The acceleration gap. Here is where the two lines meet. Jade's portfolio is growing at 8% annually. Her lifestyle cost is $50,400 per year. Right now, at $196,400, her portfolio generates $15,712 per year. The lines are not crossed yet. She's right. She's not there yet. But watch what happens as we move forward without changing anything about how Jade lives or what she earns. At $350,000, which Jade reaches in approximately 4 years at her current pace, her annual return at 8% is $28,000. At $500,000, approximately 7 years from now, her annual return is $40,000. At $630,000, approximately 9 years from now, her annual return crosses $50,400. That is the threshold. That is the moment when Jade's portfolio, on its own, in an average year, generates more real growth than her life actually costs. And here is what makes this genuinely significant. Jade is 41 right now. She reaches that threshold at approximately 50. Not 65, not retirement age, 50. A full 15 years before most financial planning models would tell her she's arrived anywhere significant. But the acceleration doesn't stop at the crossing point. Once the return line crosses the lifestyle cost line, the surplus, the portion of annual returns that Jade doesn't spend, gets reinvested, and it compounds on a larger and larger base each year. Let's follow the math precisely. Jade, at 50, has approximately $630,000 invested. Her portfolio generates $50,400 in returns that year at 8%. Her lifestyle costs $50,400. The surplus that year? Effectively zero. The lines have just crossed. But Jade is still working, still contributing $7,200 a year. So at 51, her portfolio is roughly $687,000. At 8%, that generates $54,960 in returns. Her lifestyle cost, adjusted for a 3% annual inflation, $51,912. Surplus, $3,048. Small, but it stays invested. It compounds. At 52, portfolio approximately $749,000. Returns, $59,920. Lifestyle cost, $53,459. Surplus, $6,451. At 55, portfolio approximately $950,000. Returns, $76,000. Lifestyle cost, $58,341. Surplus, $17,659. The gap is not just opening, it is accelerating. By the time Jade is 60, still working, still living exactly the same life she lives today, her portfolio has crossed $1,400,000. Her annual return at 8%, $112,000. Her lifestyle cost at 3% annual inflation from today, approximately $88,000. Annual surplus, $24,000. Reinvested, compounding, widening the gap further every single year. Jade didn't become a different person. She didn't earn more. She didn't discover a new investment strategy. She stayed consistent long enough for the math to do what the math does, and understood what she was looking at when it happened. And now, let's zoom out from Jade's kitchen table. Because the question worth asking is, if this threshold is real, if this acceleration gap is mathematically inevitable for consistent long-term investors, why does almost nobody know about it? Why does financial anxiety not decrease as portfolios grow? Why do people with $400,000 invested feel almost as financially uncertain as they did at $40,000? Here's the structural reality. The financial services industry, wealth management, retirement planning, insurance, annuities, generates its revenue from financially anxious clients. An anxious investor buys products, pays for advice, rolls over into managed funds with higher fees, purchases insurance products they may not need, stays engaged, worried, transactional. A confident investor, one who understands that their portfolio has already crossed into structural self-sufficiency, asks fewer questions, needs fewer products, and generates significantly less revenue. The global wealth management industry generated $258 billion in revenue in 2023. That revenue depends on ongoing client engagement. Ongoing client engagement depends on ongoing client uncertainty. This is not a claim that financial advisors are malicious. Most are not. It is simply an observation about incentive structures. When an industry's revenue is tied to client anxiety, that industry has no structural reason to tell its clients, you've already crossed the threshold. The math is working. You can breathe. That message, delivered clearly and early, is worth billions of dollars in unrealized revenue. So it doesn't get delivered. The standard retirement planning model reinforces this. The 4% withdrawal rule, widely used, widely taught, is built on a fundamentally conservative assumption that you will be drawing down your portfolio throughout retirement, and that the goal is to make sure it doesn't run out. That framing assumes the portfolio is a fuel tank, finite, depleting, something to be rationed carefully. What it doesn't model What almost no standard retirement planning tool models by default is the scenario where the portfolio becomes a self-replenishing engine, where returns consistently exceed spending, where the tank refills faster than you drain it. That scenario is mathematically real, and the tools most people use to plan their financial lives are not built to show it to them.
Which means millions of people who have already crossed the compounding threshold, or who are closer to it than any standard projection would suggest, are making financial decisions from a position of manufactured anxiety. Not real anxiety, manufactured anxiety. The product of tools and incentives that benefit from keeping them uncertain. You are not just fighting your own fear about money. You are fighting your own psychology plus the institutional architecture of a $258 billion industry that profits from that fear. That is a different problem, and it has a different solution. Here is the one thing I want you to take from this video. Not a plan, not a checklist, just one question. What is your portfolio's average annual return in dollars? And what does your life actually cost per year? Not what you think it should cost, not what you're budgeting toward, what it actually costs. The real number. What leaves your accounts over 12 months? Those two numbers tell you something that no retirement calculator, no financial advisor's projection, no standard planning tool will show you directly. They tell you how far apart the lines are, and whether you're closer to the threshold than you think. Jade went back to her laptop the next morning. Not because anything had changed, but because she'd heard about these two numbers, and she wanted to know where she actually stood. She calculated her annual return at 8% on $196,400, $15,712. She calculated her actual lifestyle cost, $50,400. The lines were not crossed yet, she knew that. But for the first time, she wasn't looking at a balance and feeling behind. She was looking at a distance, a specific, measurable distance, and understanding exactly what was closing it. $15,712 this year, more next year, more the year after. The threshold was not some abstract retirement destination she might reach someday if she stayed disciplined enough. It was a mathematical inevitability. 14 years of consistent behavior had already made it so. She just needed to know what to look for. The question was never whether you're doing enough. The question was whether you knew what the math was already doing for you. Jade didn't change her contribution amount after that morning. She didn't switch investment strategies. She didn't suddenly feel wealthy. What changed was simpler than any of that. She stopped measuring her progress by how the balance felt and started measuring it by how far apart the two lines were. That shift from measuring a feeling to measuring a gap is the difference between 14 more years of financial anxiety and 14 years of financial clarity. Same portfolio, same math, different understanding. You were never behind. You were just reading the wrong number. If this is the kind of explanation you've been waiting for, the real psychology behind why money feels the way it does, with the actual math behind it, subscribe.